Please rise for silent invocation, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Will the clerk call the roll?
Councilmember Foley.
Here.
Councilmember Tremont.
Here.
Councilmember Stiltner.
Here.
Vice Mayor Bastian. Mayor Burnett.
We have a quorum, and we are here gathered. Like I was talking to Shelby earlier, never get fooled by a one-item agenda. We are here to discuss the capital improvement program for fiscal years 2022 through 2027. Mr. City Manager, you want to tell us what we're doing tonight?
Yes, sir. We're going over our capital improvements program in its draft form tonight. Our finance director, Mr. Scott Niels, will present this to you. He'll take you through what we have to date, all funds, probably most of the discussion focusing on the general fund items in the upcoming year. I'll be happy to answer your questions as we go through the process and also at the end.
Thank you, sir. Scott Niels, Director of Finance and CFO. Mayor and Council, it's a pleasure to be here tonight. I really enjoy these opportunities to display the work of the Finance Department, and I give thanks to each and every one of them for their hard work, because I could not do it without them. So without further ado, this is the Capital Improvement Program presentation for the fiscal years 22 through 27. And what we hope to do tonight is to give you this FY22 review, an overview of the whole plan, and I hope each of you had a chance to go through your detailed book. That's a lot of reading, and thank you, Mayor, for identifying what area. And you know, for all of the data that we put together, we had surprisingly few mistakes, I think. So that's a remarkable effort, and I'd really like to thank our intern, Matt Myers, for his help, because without his guru ability to move data and to look at things, that would have been very difficult to proof all of this. So thank you, Matt. So just a quick refresher. I know you're very well familiar with these, but the city goals are public safety, infrastructure, quality of life, economic development, fiscal sustainability, and organizational excellence, elegance maybe.
That was a different misspelling.
Yeah. These are put in goal 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, but I know that several times the council's looked at those, not necessarily that's the order of priority. And I know that on the agenda the council has another strategic plan coming up, so these may change. But for now, this is what's guiding our development of budgets. So the purpose for tonight, again, is, as mentioned, the agenda is to go through the planning process, to look at a general fund budget update, review the ARPA proposed expenditures, that's the American Recovery Act, overview of the CIP and economic outlook, any questions and comments from the council and guidance. And then there's in the back of that PowerPoint, there are some other additional slides that, unless you're interested, we won't go through those in detail tonight. And finally, then our goal is to understand council priorities going forward, and then to answer any questions. We will have another CIP review on August, I think it's the 4th, and that's when council will approve the CIP in concept. So tonight is a discussion forum. Try to give council a sense of priorities and where you would like to go on the CIP. We've put these projects in classifications, sort of priority, but general classifications of safety, personnel, and property. Whether we're going to lose money, which means we increase cost because of delays, efficiency and effectiveness, and quality of life. So this is the planning process. We've completed all the things that have the check marks on them. Today is June 22nd when we're reviewing with the City Council. Based on your guidance, we'll go back and look at our revenues and our expenses, and then begin to fine-tune our total financial plan. And then on August 3rd was the City Council public hearing to adopt the CIP, and that deadline is the 15th.
Scott, can I pause you just one
Sure.
quick second? I just wanted to ask, as we're going through this tonight for you and the city manager, one of the things that I'm really going to want to wrap my brain around as much as possible is forecasting of projects cost with this market that we're in. And I know there's some guesswork, right? There's some strategy, some guesswork, and certainly some best case scenarios, worst case scenarios. But when we come to as we're talking about those things, if you and Wayne could weigh in as much as possible as to how we're coming up with those numbers and realistically or is that the same way we would have projected those numbers 5 years ago versus how we would be projecting them right now, especially for the earlier years that will come, like the 2022, 2023, and so forth. So if I just want to comment, if, as you're going through this in those areas, if you could just take an extra step to.
Yes, sir, be happy to do the
Feel free
ability
to go
that
a
I
little
can.
deeper in that, okay? Thank you.
Okay. So we're going to review your comments, take a look at the revenue forecast, match the revenue to funding request. Then we have some difficult choices to make, as we'll show you here a little bit later, as far as what funding we have available and what project total expense that we have, and then present new version of CIP based on available funding. So as far as the general fund, we had the preliminary values that I briefed you on the last session in May. From the preliminary values, it was a pretty good report. It was up 5.6% on the property values. Give you a fund balance update. Just for your information, the last year taxable value increase between June 1st and July 1st was about $60 million, and that's 1.6%. No guarantee that that's going to happen again this year. The increase overall from last year to this year was less than we had the prior year. The rate was about 7.7% increase in property values, and now it's down to 5.6. So it seems to be slowing just a little bit.
When you say, obviously no guarantee that that'll happen the following year, don't we have some sense of reasonable projection based on permits that are being applied for and projects that are in community development, things like that, as to what kind of new stuff might be out there to forecast? We've got to have a rough idea, right?
We're reasonably certain that it'll be relatively level, I guess.
Okay.
Is that like an economist?
All right.
At least for the next couple of years.
Okay.
We've got a lot of building coming on. One of the challenges we have is the ability to to keep our building fund in the appropriate balance, and there's a new law that came out from the state that says you have to have not more than 4 times your annual expense. And that's been a challenge because we've been bringing in so many dollars on all of our fees to be able to make sure that that's the case. The downside is that if we don't do that, there's a probability we would have to give back some of that money to the developers, and that would be not something we want to do because it's very difficult to figure out. So we're doing everything we can to manage that appropriately, and that was one of the comments that Zach made last week.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a situation where it gets really cyclical? You want to be careful with how much you play with, I guess, because if we find ourselves in downtimes, after hurricanes, I think it would be prudent for us to be waiving fees, using those dollars to offset some of those. Is that
Certainly could, yes, that's council prerogative.
But at the same time, it's hard to explain to folks, while we have so much of a revenue in there, do we find ways to give it back to those developers? And I don't know in what capacity or not, but I appreciated bringing that up. But yeah, I'll keep that on the radar.
Yeah, we're watching that very closely, and Tim's doing a great job of managing that, trying to make sure that we're within the priority or within the categories. It was kind of interesting because that came down, I think it was September of last year with an implementation date of December, and so that kind of caught most of the departments by surprise because they weren't planning on having to do that as quickly. So the regulation didn't have much teeth in it or show how they're going to evaluate it, but it's out there now, and the auditors are picking up on that and watching it. So I suspect there'll be some more guidelines coming out from the state sometime in the next year.
I mean, he does. As far as the big picture, I mean, we know the software, the building permit software has been now paid for since that dollar amount.
Mm-hmm.
And we do have the ability to look forward a few years, not only in the building fund, but also in its impact to the general fund through new development being added to the tax rolls. So we know apartment complexes, I mean, it's still the basic trend. So like you were hearing from Scott, we don't, there's not a huge mall. If you get a 1 million square foot commercial development, you know, the bringing Riverwalk will make that'll be an impact that will be noticed. You take non-taxed government-owned property, have it go on the tax rolls as a private development and put some kind of large project, that will be something that's noticeable. You know, the typical number of single-family homes is fairly consistent. So I forget what the number is, like $500,000 or so of the revenue growth in the general fund is from new development coming on the tax rolls. We don't expect to see a huge bump in that number over the next couple of years. It's a relatively small amount of new income. There's just not a lot of major commercial development coming. We've got apartment complexes that are out there. So Riverwalk may be one of the bigger components of change in the upcoming years.
Well, you also have the problem of your inflows and outflows are completely uneven. The inflows come in with impact fees and with permit fees, and they come in as projects are completed. Our outflows, you have to accumulate those before you can have a project, and so you have one outflow and it happens so you might have fees that are accumulated over time back here and some of them here for this project here.
Well, you just did with the rec project. So part of the rec project is funded by recreation impact fees. So that lowered the total amount of money in the rec impact fee account substantially. But there's a couple apartment complexes coming in, and that'll put it right back to where it was prior to that expenditure. But you're right, certain things you have to wait and let it build up. Others you can use on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, and the state did get 4 years of kind of smoothing that, but
Now, with 4 years, does that mean when we write the check or when we allocate it?
of prior expenses. So you
Okay.
go look back 4 years, and it's the average of those 4 years, or the total of those 4 years average is the balance that you're supposed to have in your building fund.
Okay.
So this next slide, part of the good news is that even with the taxable values we had on June 1st, we're looking at about $965,000 additional revenue from the property increases. Now remember, as I mentioned before, there's about $110,000 of that's just a pass-through, but it's included in revenue, and that's for the fire and the police pension fund pass-through. And just for the council, there was a slight change on that. Excuse me, next slide. As far as what I showed you initially, it was about $874,000, and that was in the general fund presentation, and that's now $965,000, so it increased about $90,000 of additional revenue based on the higher value that came in from what we anticipated. So with this, it looks like right now, depending on what happens on July 1st, we're looking at a total tax revenue levy of about a little over $17 million. And based on 0.1 or 1/10 of a mil, that's about $374,000 per tenth of a mil of revenue. So as we get further into this, as you look at your the tax rate calculation and what you think is reasonable, that should be relatively close to the kind of numbers you're looking at of what revenue will be developed by a tenth of a mil. This slide is the one, the 9/30/2020 without CARES Act was adjusted slightly. It went from 39% down to 38.7 once I had the additional number in there. The 44.4 is the one that Zach showed you last week. Now that's good news. I guess the bad news, or what we have done with that money, is that the council's authorized about $4.6 million of that fund balance to be expended in these categories. The 317 fund last year was about $2 million. Other budget amendment details, we have in the next slide the detail of that, and then just recently the council approved $1.4 million for the rec. So based on that, with those adjustments, there was about just a little under $13 million worth of fund balance, and about 1% of fund balance is about $390,000. So you can look at a tenth of a mil or whatever the value might be for taking a percent out of your fund balance. Any questions so far? Okay. This is the detail. We had the $2.5 million, or the $2.05 million that we talked about, the rec center, and the other ones are made up of the project and encumbrances carry forward. That's usually done in November after year end, so that carries over the projects that are still active. And then the COVID response, $124,000. Special election and city manager search for $100,000. the contribution you made to First Step Shelter for 35, some additional legal services, and then the Memorial Brick Program for a total of just under 4.6 million.
What's the Memorial Brick Program again?
That was recognition of revenue for the donations that were made for the bricks. We occasionally recognize that revenue, so it comes in as revenue and the appropriation from fund balance. I think that was 2 years worth, if I remember right. Is that right, Susan, here? Is that 2 years worth? Yeah, I think so.
Scott, if you could, if you can back up one page there for just a quick second on 11. And I apologize if there's a notation later in here, but do we have any anticipated other dollars that we're waiting on from past storms and that kind of stuff still to come in? I see some nods already.
You may recall that in that general fund update briefing that I gave, Allison mentioned that we have had the state obligate the balance of that money, so that's over $2 million that should be coming in.
Okay.
When the state says they're obligated, there's no time frame given on when they're going to send it.
And we're not counting it, but I was just curious for
Right.
point of discussion.
Yeah, it's-
what else is still out there that we
it's
may
coming
see
eventually.
we may see in the next month or the next 5 years.
It's an accounts receivable, it's
Yeah.
on paper, but it's
Right.
not in the bank.
Right. Yes.
So your answer was 2 million
A
outstanding?
little over 2 million. I can go back and look that up. I think it's
But that could be-
2.5 or 6, I think,
Could
total.
be 2 years before we see that.
It's very possible. Generally, Allison says that within 9 months from the time they obligated is usually when we get it.
Okay.
So it may be this year.
That's still
hopefully.
from Matthew?
Irma mostly,
Irma.
Matthew's
Mostly.
just about
Matthew's got
closed out.
just a little bit left.
Yeah, it's almost all of it from Irma. I think, what, 180,000 of it was
Yeah,
Matthew,
not
and
much
the other
more.
2 million was Irma.
So we'll call that hope money. We hope we can get it within the next fiscal year.
Council slush fund. huh?
Council hope, yeah.
Don't say that out
Oh,
loud.
yes, sorry. Strike that.
Thanks, Scott.
Okay, yes, sir. Okay, I'd like to now, we have worked with Public Utilities and Public Works to look at projects that they might have that would be
2 doozies.
comparable projects for the requirements of the ARPA legislation. As you may recall, we here not too long ago received $4,995,000 in our first tranche of the ARPA money. And then in another year, we'll receive the balance of that. So what we looked at are some projects that are significant, that this funding could be used for right away. And part of the reason for that is that the expenditures on this ARPA money has to be obligated by December of '24 and spent by December of '26. So there are other projects that we can move back or forth, but this is as a grant money that there are significant, yes, sir.
No, I'll wait till you're done.
There are significant requirements for reporting and using the money that has been given, just like all of our other grant programs. So we want to make sure that we comply with this and not have to give any of that back.
All right, so I'm clear on this. This is from the original stimulus that was thrown down to all the states and localities, where at first we weren't sure how that money was able to be used, but now we are confirmed we can use them on infrastructure projects.
Yeah, there were 2 parts to that. First one's the
Right.
CARES Act.
Right.
And that was 2.256 million.
But I'm
And then
talking
this
about
one,
the
this one was the
big
second tranche
9
that came
million.
out, the one that President Biden signed.
Mhm.
And
Treasurer
yes,
gave guidance on that in the last couple of
yeah.
weeks.
And so there are 4 criteria that they had of how you can use the money. They are giving direct compensation to first responders. You can give support to your residents in some manner. But the way we looked at it is the easiest for us to do and the most need we have is infrastructure. And that's the cleanest based on what most of the cities are doing. Because there's not much gray area in there. It's pretty black or white. If you got infrastructure, and I have a slide here that shows the cities have an awful lot of flexibility of what they want to do in that area and based on their regional or local priorities.
That's my question, thanks.
Yes, sir?
Wayne, from a strategy perspective, and you don't have to answer to it right now, but my thought would be, I know we've got till 2027 to use these funds, right?
It has to be obligated by '24
By 24.
and then spent by '26.
Okay, so I guess my question was gonna be from a strategy perspective, and not to sound too cliche, but 9.9 million is a lot of money today. It's not gonna be the same amount in terms of what it's gonna get us years down the road. So should this be an urgency for us to make sure we identify, agree, and get the ball rolling quick on
We got
projects?
9.7 of the 9.9
Yeah.
identified right now.
Exactly, and so that's what I'm saying, in terms of like getting to that sooner rather than kicking it down, with the whole, we'll figure it out later, because every year that goes by, the cost of these projects go up.
Some
Seems like we're
some
making it
communities,
more
because some of those categories aren't as black and white as to how you can spend it as others, and so I've just kind of done internet research trying to see what other places are doing, and some people are just sitting and waiting. I think the infrastructure, as Scott said, is way more black and white. Water and sewer projects seem to be very clear that's something you can do, and like Councilman Stiltner was saying, the price is expected to go up on these things. The longer you take to spend it, the less you probably get out of it. We have a number of very solid, reasonable infrastructure improvement projects. You'll see in the next slide that shows
You're
what
gonna
these
spend
water and
half of
sewer
it on the
are.
next slide.
Right, yeah. And the stormwater ones, that's a little bit not as clear, but we do have legitimate drainage needs on the east side of the community. You'll see when those two master plans. So I think the slides that follow that show the pictures and the ideas, the two water sewer projects I think are clear to move forward now. We actually have under design. We believe we can get those done in that timeline and move forward in a rational pace that gets us the best value. The stormwater projects aren't as complicated to design and permit, so it may take a little bit longer to get to them. And so you'll see the 9.7 is not all the water and sewer, but we do believe that that's the next greatest need in this area. If for some reason there's an issue with stormwater, we can always do more utility water sewer.
Thanks.
What the guidance has been, it says under water sewer infrastructure, building/upgrading facilities and transmission, distribution, and storage systems, including the replacement of lead service lines. And the next one addresses what City Manager said, invest in wastewater infrastructure projects. For example, constructing publicly owned treatment infrastructure, managing and treating stormwater or subsurface drainage water, facilitating water reuse, and securing publicly owned treatment works. So that's, to me, that's pretty clear of what we can do. And then there is a question of whether or not a master plan would be included in that, and I've asked GFOA for guidance on whether or not that's included. I would think that would be under managing, but I just want to make sure. And so the key that I wanted on this slide is to say that the recipients, who we as a city are, retain substantial flexibility and highest priority for their communities. So that gives the council a lot of leeway on defining what they want to do with that money. As City Manager mentioned, this is one of the, or two of the major projects that, and a nice thing about these, the biggest problem with one of the things they had with the Obama the stimulus money was that they wanted them to be shovel-ready, but people didn't have shovel-ready projects. Fortunately, Lynn has already had these designed, and so they're a lot further along and could be implemented relatively quickly. In the back of your slide, under the addendum, there's a detailed presentation, or you can see in the individual project data sheets the description of these projects. So the one on the top there on the north side is the sewer system rehab for $3 million, and the bottom one is the water system rehab. And some of the things that Lynn had mentioned today, as far as the storm or the sewer one, is that Daytona Beach Shores and Ponce Inlet are our customers. They're billed at a higher rate. It's going to be under the river, buried 20 feet, that the water line is, and we don't have that in-house capability, so it really needs to go outside to a contractor. Another one is that it's the environmental impact if there's a failure. And you may recall that there's been several leaks in that water line already that Lynn has had to deal with. And it's already part of the current plan, it's in design. So I don't know if, yes sir?
Go ahead, I'll let you finish first.
No, I was gonna see if Lynn wanted to add any more to that, since she's spending $5 million. She knew I was gonna call on her.
Probably gonna have some questions on a $5 million project, but.
Well, I'll start with a simple one, which could be just yes or no. Is these two quotes you're seeing for $3 million and $2 million, do they reflect the increases we've seen as of late in cost of materials and labor on some other projects like the rec center?
No.
Okay, so these starts at
We
5.
expect another $1 million between the two projects.
That's what I wanted to know.
And
Yeah.
could you introduce yourself, please?
Sorry, Lynn Stevens, Public Works Utilities Director.
Welcome.
Thanks.
Good to see you.
So I did want to point out that the sewer line, there is one sewer line that feeds Beachside. So the sewer system in Ponce Inlet is wholly owned and operated by the city of Port Orange. That is our sewer system. We are connected to Daytona Beach Shores. They pump their sewage through that same pipeline. As well as we do have customers along the river that are in our city limits. So that's the customer base that we'll be serving over there. There are quite a few septic tanks over there that have been identified that are part of our septic to sewer project. So we're going to hopefully be able to serve those customers as well. There's only one 20-inch sewer line that crosses the river right now. We have no redundant system. So if this sewer line fails, we have no sewer service to the beachside communities. So this will be a second sewer line that runs under the river over to service those communities. The existing pipeline is about 30 years old.
What's the warranty on it?
I think the warranty's out.
I think it might be.
Built the last
So this would be a
one.
second one, so we won't remove the old 30-year one?
We will not remove the old one.
Is that an
Our
environmental
plan,
Redundancy.
it would be an environmental hazard. Our plan is to clean and line it like we've been doing some of our other sewer lines throughout the city and hold it as a backup.
And is that part of the cost that's reflected on here, or would that be another project?
That is part of the cost.
Okay.
Where do the extra dollars come from as this increases past the budgeted dollars?
So we do plan to go for some grant funding because it is a sewer line. It is an environmental hazard if you do have a leak of sewage under the intercoastal waterway. So we believe that we'll be able to get some state grant funding as well. So that's part of our plan. Also, council had approved in our budget last year to do this design, so it's already been designed. It's in design currently, in permitting and design. We have to get rights of way. We have to work with Department of Environmental Protection and find to get the right of way to get a new line under the river. So we have quite a bit of permitting to go through. U.S. Army Corps of Engineers comes into play. So we have a lot of things to do before we physically start construction. All of that's underway. That was approved in last year's budget. So we've already started down that path, and that money has already come out of the utility fund for that design. We also had this funded out of the utility fund. So we had already planned to take this money out of the utility fund before we found out about the ARPA money.
Now, the grant funding, where would that come from? Would that have to go through legislative appropriations, or are there another things where you apply for that for?
I would have deferred to Amanda Lasecki, but I don't have her to defer to, so we'll be working for that.
There's a number of grants
There are a
available through the
number.
St. Johns River Water Management District that we could probably qualify for.
I think Find even might be somewhere that could be looked at too.
So I don't know if Find will help, but
Because it
certainly
crosses the
DEP,
navigational
St.
area.
John's, there's quite a bit of funding out there for sewer lines. It's a lot easier than trying to get stormwater money through legislation.
And there's a possibility we'd be able to get grants for both these projects, both URH 003 and WRP 200.
So the water will be more difficult
Okay.
because there are two lines that cross under the river for drinking water. So there are two water lines that go under the river, but there is only one sewer line. So the sewer line, you'll be able to get funding because it is the only sewer line that goes to Beachside, so it has a major environmental issue. So there's quite a few mitigation grants out there. There's quite a few grants available, we believe, for the sewer line, not so many for the water line.
Okay.
Because of the environmental impact.
Correct. And the water line, like I said, we already have two there. What we're proposing now is, if you recall last year, I was standing in front of you asking for quite a few $100,000 to repair this particular line. And we believe after we've inspected the exterior of the pipeline as much as we could, it's time to replace that pipe.
Are both pipes 30 years old?
Yes.
Okay.
Now, the one thing I also want to note when she talks about the environmental hazard of removing the existing line when we can use that for redundancy, I believe I read somewhere that that was constructed out of asbestos laced concrete, or asbestos was part of that, so that probably would be prohibitively expensive to remove.
It would be, and normally you don't remove a pipe like this. You just fill it with grout and you move on.
Right.
So it's not common practice to remove a pipe out of the ground anywhere, even on the mainland side. We don't remove those pipes. We simply fill them with grout and leave them in place.
It's interesting to learn.
Couple more questions for you.
Yes, sir.
Since you're doing so well. One, how long is our contract and obligation tied in with Ponce Inlet? How does that work? Like, what I'm getting at is, we spend $5 million here. How do we know Ponce Inlet's not going to say, well, you know, that's all great, but we want to use Daytona or whatever? I mean,
So
what's our assurances there that they're going to be our customers well into the future?
Geography.
Yeah,
Ponce-
well, that's for one, but
Ponce Inlet is part of our service area
Okay.
for water. So
they're locked into us.
they're locked into us
Got
for
it.
water.
Okay.
As far as sewer, we own the sewer system. They do
Yep.
not. That's
Got it.
our sewer system, again, our service area.
Got it.
Now, when it comes to the shores, the water system is our water system.
Mm-hmm.
So that is our service area for drinking water. Sewer, on the other hand, we have an agreement with them. I don't know the expiration of the interlocal agreement, but they've indicated they have no interest in going elsewhere.
So those cities have ARPA funds also, right? I'm assuming?
I don't know.
I would imagine. So any scenarios where they use some of their ARPA funds as well for these projects, and we can maybe lock them into some rates for a few years or something like that? I'm just kind of throwing that out there. I don't know that that's.
So not something I had thought about. Certainly something we can talk about
Just curious,
internally and approach.
thinking how do we maximize every one of these $9.9 million funds? You know what I mean? So maybe give that some thought to see if you know, hey, if you put in X out of your ARPA side into this project, maybe we can. And I'm not looking for an answer right now because I know there's some numbers and some strategy strategy's the wrong word, but some thought that needs to go into that. But what would that look like, and is it even something we want to go down
Sure.
that path? And then
Certainly something we can evaluate. I know that I've had conversations with both communities about doing a joint application for the grant funding on the sewer line. So all of them are agreeable to being part of that. Of course, it's much easier to get that grant funding when you have multiple communities all joining together.
And if we can figure out a way to tie in some of their ARPA dollars, I think that's very reasonable if we can come up with a solution that seems to work. Also, on all of these projects too, if you guys can kind of, whether it's Wayne or the department head or you, Scott, is just expand on a little bit on how do we see this as an opportunity to benefit our residents in terms of cost savings now and either cost reductions of services in the future or less likelihood of cost increases in the future or whatever. So you guys can just always try to touch on that on these projects too.
I think just on the surface, you can see that we had already planned to replace these
Yeah.
under our water sewer
That's what made me think of it,
funds,
yeah.
which would have deferred other things
Right.
in our community. So now with the ARPA funding, that money now becomes
Sure.
available in our water sewer fund. That money then can be reallocated elsewhere
Right.
in our collection and distribution system.
That's exactly what I'm.
And so the
looking for.
residents are
Touch
aware.
on those.
Sorry, Scott.
No, you're fine. Go ahead.
It's just the residents are aware, that anyone listening, then what that allows us to do, these are ready projects. These are, which will help us get to that 2024 deadline for when the money has to be allocated, versus there may be projects in the community that we know need to be done, but they still need plans to be drawn up, and so they're not necessarily as far along in the process as these are.
So the sewer line is in design as we speak.
Right.
We've already awarded that contract. The scope of work for the design for the water is just about ready to come to you for award.
Just like you said, this $10 million funds a project we were planning to pay out of our funding, which then that $10 million will do other projects, which delays the need to increase rates or some other way to pay for them. We get $10 million more in projects done than we were planning to have the revenue to be able to do.
And keep in mind, even if we didn't have them as customers, the Shores and Ponce Inlet, we would still have to provide for a very small area. And this would be a very large expenditure to provide for a very small area. So it makes sense in many ways. And if we didn't have ARPA, our customers in the shores, our customers in Ponce Inlet, they'd be paying for this as
Sure.
well.
Yeah.
You know, because we don't, you know, we're just like any other business. We're not in business to give it away. You know, we're not business to fleece them, but I mean, if this is the cost of providing service, then they should be prepared to pay that. And
Well,
if they
we
want
are
water
their,
and sewer, that's.
yeah, we are their treatment facility, so anyway,
And,
I think
and
it's
we
worth
have
it.
a fantastic relationship with both those
Yeah.
cities now,
I just
as
think it's worth
opposed to
taking a
8
look
years
at.
ago.
And the Shores has paid a portion of the money for the treatment plant.
Yeah.
So they have allocated 1.5 million gallons of sewage to our wastewater plant. So they already have
Yeah.
that reserved, and
That's a terrific
Well,
point.
then you guys get with CM there and you guys figure
Sure.
out if that's a path we should go down, and if so, let's do it.
okay. Oh, okay.
Yeah, please don't go away, because I got something on another one.
While
So
you,
the
while you.
second part of that, as I mentioned, oh, sorry.
Sorry, just while you transition, I just wanted a side note, not relating to this, but sort of, Wayne, I asked a question earlier, you know, where would that grant funding come from? You know, would it be, you know, would it be the legislative appropriation for, we always go for bills. I'd like to be a part of that conversation this year as far as what we're going to request, what kind of bills we're going to float up there, what we're going to request for grants. Because typically in years past, I found out later on, we never really had that discussion up here that I recall. So I want to be a part of that, because I always feel that infrastructure projects need to be primary requests. That's my personal preference.
So it mentioned that the stormwater master plan for phase 2 for the 250. And we have a couple of projects identified for that, and then since Lynn's here, she can go through these 2 slides, so the pink and the green, and Lynn, I'll give that to you.
So the pink is the master plan phase 2. That's the one that we want to do next, and that's part of what this project is for, would pay for through the ARPA funding. The green is the portion of master plan already completed on the next slide. So we have already done the master plan. We have about $12 million worth of projects recommended by the engineers for this area. We have done some minor improvements and whittled that down just a little bit. We've worked with some developers that have also helped incorporate some of those improvements into their design. So that has whittled that $12 million down a little bit, but not significantly. These projects have not been designed, but as Mr. Clark had pointed out, stormwater projects are generally a little bit easier to get permitted and moving forward, at least these smaller localized projects that we'd be looking at. Unlike Virginia Monroe, which was a major project, some of the smaller projects we'll be able to get moving pretty quickly.
I'd like an update on that pretty soon, if you don't mind.
On Virginia Monroe,
Yes.
still waiting for FPL.
All right.
Everything else is completed.
It was in the weekly last week.
Yes, sir.
Thanks.
So as soon as FPL runs the power to the pump station on Monroe, then that system will finish up. We will finish all of that project
That's
up.
right.
I'll ask the same question just for the slides. I think I'm gonna know the answer. Can we assume about a 20% increase on this number as well?
Well, this is just the master plan. These are not the projects. We do think that the projects will increase in cost. Hopefully by the time we get ready to spend those ARPA funds, some of those prices, I hope, will come back down. Engineers use quite a few
Some will,
modeling
some won't.
products out there, computer products, to come up with the cost of construction on a real-time basis. It just caught some of them off guard with some of the construction because everything went up so quickly after COVID, was such an impact that the price index in their computer software didn't quite catch up as quickly as the market increased.
Plus, all these developers know that all these cities and counties and states have new money to spend.
That is our biggest concern. We're hoping that since the water and sewer projects were already in our queue to get designed and permitted, we're hoping that we'll be ahead of some of that rush to construct.
Mhm.
We'll be competing against a very active private industry right now as well, so
Yes, sir.
good to push it. Before you walk away,
Yes, sir.
I know Jake and I think you a little bit, we've discussed conceptually the need for a water treatment facility on the west side.
So in the original, the earlier master plan for wastewater, there was a plan to put a wastewater treatment plant on the west side of town. Yes, sir. So we are undergoing the facility plan right now for wastewater. So that will give us our roadmap as to what we need to do for our treatment systems, our reclaimed water systems, and our disposal systems. And if we need to, when we need to, add that second plant out west.
Okay. And the reason why I even brought it up is just so that it's on everybody's radar when it comes.
Oh, it's always on our radar.
I want to make sure it's on our radar. I know it's on yours, I just want to make sure it's on ours.
Yes, sir.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you, Lynn. So now we'll go back to some individual CIP requests. This is for fiscal year 22. So the total for all funds in the FY 22 is $25.9 million, broken out by the categories of safety, of personnel or property, whether it lose money or increase cost of delays, efficiency and effectiveness, quality of life, and fleet. This slide talks about the 317 capital fund. There are $2.7 million worth of requests broken out by the same categories, classifications. $1.5 million for the safety issue, $850,000 for the increased cost, $336,000 for efficiency and effectiveness, and $30,000 for quality of life. And we've got another slide coming up at the end for council to go into more detail on these of which ones you would like, if any. So broken out by department, Public Works, excuse me, Public Works and Public Utilities has about 74% of the total. If you add in stormwater, that's 82% of the total request for the year. That's broken out by the individual amounts for each of the cost centers. Any questions on that slide?
Couldn't help but notice that Lynn with Public Utilities and Public Works ties up about 74% of that number.
Pretty close.
Just saying, Lynn.
You throw in stormwater, you got 82%.
That's true.
And if you look at funding, we have general, non-general fund planned funding of $16.5 million, ARPA of $5 million, contingent funding, which includes TPO grants, fair share, developer, and FDOT contributions, and then the general fund 317 unfunded at this point. So a brief economic outlook, as some of this you already know. Last month in May over April is a 5% increase, and the biggest price increases are gasoline. Utility gas service up 13%, and Lynn has indicated to us based on FPL's numbers that our cost of electricity will go up about 13% this next year. So yes, it's going up very rapidly. I think it will peak a little bit, but in the short term we are competing with all of the money that's out there, all of the ARPA money, all of the other stimulus money that's put into the economy. There's a huge savings rate, so there's a lot of pent-up demand. And so as you're starting to see that demand get released now, you got Amazon's Prime Day, and you got Walmart doing that, and you got Target doing that. So the consumers now are starting to add a lot of that, so you get that increased pressure of buying. The Federal Reserve has indicated that yes, they're familiar with inflation. This is the 5%. Federal Reserve target is 2%, so we're already over that. Their particular status, their way that they stated is that yes, 2% is our target, but we will accept a higher rate. Will slowly come back down. There's question whether or not that's actually going to be able for them to do once it gets going. This particular chart shows the dot plot of all of the votes for the individual Fed members. And you can see in 23 there were only 7 that showed they thought there was going to be an increase in 23, the most of them in the longer term. But the recent ones just on June 16th said that 13, not 7, expect a short-term rates by the end of 2023. in March, most of them anticipated holding the rate steady through 2023.
Scott, with that in mind, do we have any opportunities with our current bonds to refinance at lower rates, or are we pretty much close to the bottom now?
No, we have a lot of debt rolling off, but yes, Toby Wagner, we're meeting with him on the 29th to go over
Okay.
our whole debt portfolio, and there's a couple
Good.
that are available for refinance, which is still
Good.
bring us some
Okay.
good returns.
Scott,
This is,
before you-
yes, sir.
I'm sorry, I apologize again. Before you go too far down that, on page 24, do you have the, and if you don't have it, it's okay, I'm just curious, what was the FY 21 capital request number? I'm just trying to compare it to what we got here.
On the total request, I don't know, but I'll find out for you, Councilman.
Okay, thanks. Just for some perspective. Thanks.
As you've seen what's happened with this going back to June of 20 through March of 21, the short-term rates have been basically zero, which has been a real impact on our investment portfolio earnings. As we're on more of those short-term rates, our average maturity I think is 2.8 or something years on weighted average maturity. So we are in the short-term market on our own. Alternatively, if you look at what's happening with the equity side, they've had tremendous returns, and has been reported recently to council, all of the pension funds have shown remarkable returns over the last year, and that's because a lot of them are more in the equities market rather than just the short-term investment rates. So that's good news on one side and not so good news on the other. So that concludes my formal presentation, and I'll turn it over to the city manager now for comments and guidance from the council.
1 second before, Wayne, before you do that, Scott, with this, I apologize. I think I probably caused you a loss in train of thought there on page 30. I think you were going to comment on that page, but I saw the graph and knew what it was. I just noticed this morning on one of the national news networks that a lot of these products over the last 60 days have actually started to already come back quite a bit. They touched on lumber specifically because that's been a huge issue. And I want to say they even use a number like 50%. So it's coming back.
Which still
quick,
leaves it pretty high compared
Sure,
to.
no doubt, but knowing I think these numbers come from March,
Right.
it might be interesting just for historical perspective I like this chart and maybe update this in another month or so just to kind of be able to have and see what that looks like.
And part of
I
it,
think some will come back over time and some may fall back in line pretty quick.
a great question,
I think-
Councilman. One of the things this shows is the uncertainty in the market. And
Yeah.
when we go out to our contractors, they're having to bid out a year or more for their services. And so the question is, what do I put in my bid to protect myself? And so they're going to, right now, I would say, price it on the high side.
Mhm.
And if that's what we're competing with, we may be stuck in a contract that's much more than their actual prices. Or they may not bid at all, it's just too uncertain. We saw that recently in the wreck. It went from 3 million to 4 million in a very short period of time. So I see that happening in the market generally across the board. And you are right, it has leveled off a little bit. How much it's going to go down, we don't know. There's still a lot of that pent-up demand, and once inflation really starts to hit, it could just break right through the Fed's barrier and be Katie bar the door, and that's one of my
Swings
concerns.
back pretty quick and the contractor for the wreck can reassess.
I don't
that
know if
over
that's,
might be
I
looking
don't know
like.
if that's in the contract or not.
Right?
I don't think so.
It would be nice to see this slide again with where we are with these, and then if you find new numbers to kind of highlight some of those major differences, if there are
Yes.
any.
This one?
On 30, yeah. If you find that there are some really big changes, discrepancies where things have begun to revert in pricing, or we see an increase
Sure.
in pricing in some of the other materials, would like to see that notated. Be helpful.
I think typically, a lot of contractors put in a 10% contingency, and they've all rethought that.
Yeah.
And over time, depending on the size and scope of the project, we're not going anywhere. We're going to continue operation year after year after year after year. We're going to see years where we'll see an example of it like the wreck, and then we may in 2 years from now or 2-3 years, some of these things we're talking about, where we actually get to time to expenditure, we'll see some of it come back to us.
Right.
So that's just the ebbs and flows of the market.
Can you go forward to the slide
Sure.
after the blank? But as you heard as we went through the projects, and I'm not going to assume that you don't want to go into great detail on the enterprise fund related capital projects, but you saw like 80% of those projects come out of sources other than the general fund revenue. We haven't reached the point yet. It's still early in the budget process. You don't adopt the CIP and concept until early August, but we believe we can balance all those other funds reasonably well. So the challenge becomes the 317, which is just our inside number for the general fund. So these are your general fund projects. When we started this process a month or so ago, there were almost $7 million worth of requests out of general fund in the next year. And we have whittled it down by deferring into future years to 2.7. So there's been a pretty good movement in it. You can see some of the projects on here that got deferred to get us to the 2.7. 2.7 million, if you remember last year or towards the end of the process, you had about a $2 million list of what was called a la carte, and you used fund balance to cover all that. $2.7 million is about what, a 0.7 mil tax dollar amount. There isn't enough money in the fund balance this year to do 2.7 million. With the 4.5 that got spent during this year, we wouldn't be coming to you. That 2.7 is an early list. We're going to continue working at it. Some of these projects we have not had the chance to get in and make sure that we have, you may be able to do them over 2 or 3 years, and so you reduce the cost in the current year. Some of them may have funding sources beyond general fund. We may be able to partially fund them out of one of those other funds. We found a couple earlier. Some of the deferments you see, we had either gas taxes or impact fees or some other sources to get to. So we haven't cleaned through to the point of knowing that every project on here is idealized as to how it should be funded appropriately, either over multiple years or funding sources. Some of these are likely going to continue to get deferred. I think the point of putting it in front of you is just to let you know where we were here, to let you know that that number in the current year is likely higher than will come to you, because I don't think we can recommend to you $2.7 million worth of general fund and expect to be a 0.7. They're just between the, as we talked about earlier, the new growth from development hitting the tax rolls, the increase in property taxes, and what's in the fund balance to cover what we need to run this community in the future year. There isn't money there for $2.7 million worth of general fund capital projects. The pattern here, and we'll work on this for you over time, is a lot of these projects came up 2, 3, 4 years ago as a request for something and got deferred then, because there is no general fund capital set aside every year. And we talked about this last time at the last workshop. We're committing to you, we're going to find a way to make this a more efficient process. So, because what happens is the air conditioner showed up 4 years ago, didn't get funded, got deferred. The year after, a parking lot got added to the list, and as time goes by, you end up with 5 projects that are deferred. Now you're looking at $5 million of cost instead of one project at $1 million, and it's on us to provide you with such. You shouldn't be asked at the end of a budget process, hey, have you got $2 million to fund general fund capital? We need to build you a process through, and that's why I strongly believe we need to find a way to set aside money. Roofs wear out, air conditioners wear out, sidewalks wear out. We need to set aside a level, thoughtful, rational approach to dealing with these instead of coming to you when they break. And so we're going to keep doing that. Now the downside is that what we're looking at now is there's a decent number of these. None of these projects are bad projects. I remember I sat down and looked at them all, and I thought, well, certainly I'll be able to get 20% of these gone because they're not going to be important. And it wasn't that way. In fact, we brought every department head into the room and sat down and talked about what can we do to put this in a manageable number. And so that's how we got you to the 2.7 that's in front of you tonight. This is not our recommendation to you. It's just showing you where we're at today. I will continue to reduce those numbers. I recognize at some point in an attempt to, as I understand what council would like me to do, is to get you to a number we think we can fund without a substantial tax increase for this. I'll cut them. If you want them to go back, we can put them back in, but I'll bring them to you as a list that we think is the appropriate list of priorities at a reasonable number. because we still haven't, in addition to that 2.7 million of capital, we have not added in the alternates for you to consider for getting to the $15 an hour minimum wage. So all of those combined create a nice challenge for us between now and then. And a couple of you have already responded on the July 13th workshop. What we'll bring to you then is a fairly straightforward, here are capital projects, here are the enhancements departments came up with, whether it's a new firefighter or a new computer software, whatever those are that are non-capital, those total costs that affect the general and some options on the 15, and say this is the total cost of our budget for general fund, and here's the revenue we believe we have, and this would be the tax increase necessary to fund it. And so you would have a chance to look at that, because what we did not want to do is to come to you on July 20th and say set a max millage without having a chance to work with that number. And the reason we asked for the 15th is in the event that we can't reach where we need to be on the 13th, we can come back and keep working at it. So that the 20th is likely to be a busy meeting because it's the only meeting in July, so you're going to have regular planning items and other agenda items. And so we wanted to give you as much time as you want to have to talk about the budget as we go forward before we ask you to set a max millage, knowing that we still have 2 months or a month and a half to get it to a real budget that you're being asked to adopt. But I know how sensitive setting that max millage is, so we don't want to put you in a position where you felt pushed to do something you're not comfortable. So that's what the objective is going forward, is we will take any feedback you have tonight. I keep hitting things with my hand. Any feedback that you have on some of these projects and moving forward, we'll bring to you on the 13th a bottom line idea, work from there to get you to a max millage, and then we'll continue to streamline as we go forward.
Wayne, one of the things that we have done a little bit in the past couple of years, I'm not opposed to doing it again. I just don't want to try to stretch something and use too much of a crystal ball. But since we know we do have some funds still out there from some of the storms, mostly Irma, is we kind of have earmarked in past years that it's not going to make the cut this year, but when that money comes in, we'll take care of it. We'll do it right then, because we know it is coming. We do know that there are some projects that are more urgent than others, and so that may be something is to kind of for you to sit down and somewhat of a plan B to say this is another scenario, and maybe these 4 or 5 projects this is what we think the anticipated cost is. We're gonna go with a best guess realistic scenario that we think we can get by another year, or when those dollars come in through this other avenue, that we'll execute them then. So just something to think about.
Thank you.
And the other thing, we do this every year. These are all the projects. They're in a CIP. Particularly when we look at the out years, the majority of them are unfunded. There are things that come in and out of the CIP every year based on new knowledge.
Yep.
So I think council right now, I think we've all had a chance to look at the CIP as proposed. It's a preliminary document. There are some things in there, Wayne, you and I talked about it earlier, that may or may not belong for different reasons, and we may not end up doing them. But if there's anything that absolutely in your heart does not belong there right now, are there any of those on your list? I think today would be a good day to talk about it with staff about why something was proposed. If you all have any of those, bring them out today so that there are no surprises to staff later on and your other fellow council people too. So I appreciate you getting this to us. I think my eyes are definitely more challenged, or the print's getting smaller in these every year.
A combination of both, I think. So I do have the 317 fund list with the 2.7 million up, and so if there are any that you do not want to fund this year, that would be helpful, at least for us to start whittling those things down.
Or if you want a more detailed explanation of what they are, we have department heads here that can explain it. So.
Wayne, to some degree on these projects, and I know you have been going through them thoroughly, to some degree I tend to want to lean a little bit on your guidance Because I know with some of this stuff, you know, there may be an opportunity to do things now to save a little bit of money or to bundle something, and I don't want to break apart projects where we think we're bundling a couple of things and to get savings and then not do them, only to find out the following year it cost us 30% more to do it. So I'd ask you to look at that and give us some feedback on that, as well as the other topic that I just talked about, you know, and just kind of give us your guidance on that. I mean, every single project that I see on there is worthy. It all needs to be done. It's just going to come down to what's the best time to do it and how, you know, how do we do it? And we're probably going to come up with some good strategies, and then some other ones we might look back in a few years and go, we maybe could have done it sooner, later, whatever. It just, but you got to make some decisions, and I want to lean a little bit on your guidance on that, because I think you evaluate these things very well with your staff, and I know staff, you know, and the other thing too is, can we get it done? We have seen, that's something that we've seen in the past too, is, you know, we allocate the funds only to find out we really we can't get it done next year anyhow, or there were some, you know, issues going on with that. So, you know, I would look at that, and some of these may have something to do with that chart we were looking at, you know, waiting for some of these costs to swing back the other way.
There's some that I don't want to wait on, and I know we've
Yeah.
spaced, anytime I see add a right turn lane or extend a left turn lane, I want to do them all this year. And I know it doesn't work that way, but
We absolutely can do that. We will accept responsibility to help prioritize. I know those categories are ones you used in the past, and there can be somewhat subjective.
Yeah.
Within them, there may be some that are effectiveness and efficiency that are actually as important as something that's considered safety. So we will tighten this up and bring it to you. It's a challenge, but I can say that the department head group is a good group to have that challenge with. And you know, we sat down a couple hours the other day, and that group came together as a team to get it from what at the time was $4 or $5 million down to 2.7, as we deferred what was making sense. And several creative, hey, look, did you not think about this? This is an actual impact fee, or this is a, you know, there are legitimate and fair and appropriate ways to fund things so that the beneficiary is who's funding them. So they were very good at helping us understand all the options available. I think we can tighten this for you.
Well, and Tim's team is a really good example of having projects ready to go that we forecasted farther out, and then all of a sudden there was, you know, the state had dollars that needed to be spent, and we had things ready to go, and we were the benefactor of that to get stuff done sooner and at less cost and more state money involved. So, you know, that type of stuff, and seeing how that history is and what do we got ready to go, and you know, I get it. Some of it is a little crystal ball type of stuff going on, but you got a strong staff that I think can give us the best guidance on this.
One of the things to keep in mind is that TPO has kind of changed the way that they're looking
Yes,
at
they have.
projects. I don't know, Tim, if you want to expand on that. I mean, basically, they're saying you have to have a minimum of $250,000 to do the design, and that may incorporate 2 or 3 of our projects. So if you delete one, then that kills the whole other ones.
Yeah, and Tim's welcome to come up and talk on that. But what I hear out of the TPO board as well is that there's a likelihood that may cause some smaller cities to just take their projects off completely.
Yep.
And now that money is still got to, you know, the state wants to use that money and get these projects done, and that's where I think some of that money can come back up. Is that kind of what you think, Tim?
Tim Berman, Community Development, that's exactly what's happening there that we're seeing too. We noticed we did one bundle project with some Dunlawton projects, and it moved up pretty quickly in the chart the first time on there, in terms of where it's ranking then. So we see it as a benefit if you've got enough projects in the same area to bundle them, because if the city's able to do that, then they can move quicker in terms of the implementation, versus in the past where you had to wait on a single project, didn't rank high enough. The bundling is looking to help us. Its key is just basically making sure you find enough projects at one time to put them in that bundle to move them along then. So, but
Yeah, and I don't want to lose sight of that, because we have done that so well over the last 5-6 years that it's hard to remember that we've saved a lot of money.
pays to be ready.
Yeah, it has paid to be ready. And so when you look at these numbers, sometimes, you know, you get that sticker shock, and then you realize that there is savings there. Even though some of those numbers are pretty big, getting them done now keeps them from being a lot bigger in a few more years. So
We're not a small place anymore.
not anymore.
That's the bottom line. Oh, by the way, just for the record for everybody, Scott Stiltner is the council representative on the TPO, so bring it home, friend.
Yeah. But not as intuitive as Tim Berman to wear traffic cone orange and talk about traffic.
Just saying.
I will do better next time. I thought we were gonna talk about, well, we did talk about some water stuff, so that's why I went blue to support Lynn, you know, so.
Just a quick couple other slides for council. Our total capital request for the period 22 through 27 is $164 million. Again, public utilities takes the lead there, followed very closely by community development. And then as far as available funding, 88 million is planned. Again, that's mostly unfunded. Contingent funding is the same. ARPA picks up the other 5 million. So it's a very large group of projects to consider. And I think Councilman Stiltner brought it up very well, is that we need to be able to identify that funding in a much better way. And I think I mentioned to you before that I am looking at a way to do that. There's software that's available to do capital allocation planning, where it takes into account the risks across all the different projects, and it then models it to say, okay, if I have a street to do and I have a water pump that I need to do, based on the cost of future repair, which one is the best one to do? And we have not had that tool in the past, and I think that's exactly what you're, I can't come to you and say, this is my financial expertise saying this is the funding that you ought to do. And I think that's, it's on our capital request for next year. So just keep in mind that that's the way we're heading. And that's all I had. Council, I don't know, City Manager, if you had anything else for me?
Council, any other questions, specific or general? Jonathan?
No, as far as FY 2022, I don't have anything that's glowing. I understand that. I'm sorry, I should have my mic on. As far as FY 22, I don't have anything that is glaring at me. And I understand that this is really a preliminary step and there's still discussions to be had, but I think Scott's got the right idea in that we can lean pretty heavily on Wayne here and his expertise and experience in a lot of this area. So, but nothing other than that.
Chase, anything else to add?
Just again, a compliments to the staff, every year, and I know I say no to a whole bunch of things, and I'll do it again this year, but it's never because it's a poor request. It's always a very, they're well thought out, they're quality projects, so I never question the motives of our department heads and our staff, and that's a testament to all the leadership across the board. So, I appreciate that staff understands and recognizes the personality of the council and doesn't fill this thing with a bunch of fluff. So, again, as always, my compliments to staff.
Scott, anything else to add?
I don't think so.
Okay. Scott, I appreciate your time, your hard work, and of course, I'm saying that to you. When I say that to you, I mean that to you and the 30 million other
That's
people
correct.
you got behind you, flowing your
Great team to
department
work
and the
with.
other department heads as well. We've come a long way, but we've got a long way to go. And Wayne, the only thing I have to say is sharpen your pencil, my friend.
Or the eraser.
Wayne, you have anything else for us this evening?
No, sir, I do not.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Have a good night.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mayor and Council.